Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CyberWire's Research Saturday. I'm Dave Bittner, and this is our weekly conversation with researchers and analysts, tracking down the threats and vulnerabilities, solving some of the hard problems of protecting ourselves in a rapidly evolving cyberspace. Thanks for joining us.
We were actually following up and along with some other activity that this group, we call them Cloaked Ursa. They're also known as APT-29 Nobelium or Cozy Bear, depending on which nomenclature you're more familiar with.
That's Jen Miller-Osborn. She's Deputy Director of Threat Intelligence with Palo Alto Networks Unit 42. The research we're discussing today is titled Russian APT-29 Hackers Use Online Storage Services DropBox and Google Drive.
They're one of the more dangerous APT groups that are out there. They have long been considered to be affiliated with the Russian government, and they are responsible for some very long-range impact attacks, such as SolarWinds has been attributed to them, and even before that, the hack of the United States Democratic National Committee in 2016 was also attributed to this group. So it's one that we pay a lot of attention to. And this use and abuse of different cloud and social media hosting services, we've been seeing them use quite a bit, especially the last year or two, in an effort to try to use the reputations of those services to get past potential blocks on where their malware could be hosted or pulled down from. Because as a general rule, a lot of these services they're blanket trusted if it's coming from there, and everyone uses it for so many things. And it requires a secondary component for really scanning kind of what the different potential packages could be. But we found this follow on with DropBox as we've been following them because they had been very active this past year. They're actually still active. There's been some recent activity attributed to them even since we were talking about it. It was more of a natural evolution kind of as we were following them to see them abusing yet another cloud service. And we wanted to make sure that as when some other organizations have discovered them abusing other services, that was highlighted, because it is something they're using to try to take advantage of those trusted reputations.
Yeah. And I suppose just to make it crystal clear here, I mean, is it that it's difficult for an organization to block, Google Drive or Dropbox or Microsoft Azure, any of these big cloud services, because they are so broad and so vast, and indeed folks rely on them for a lot of the business they do day to day.
Exactly. And that's why we're seeing these attack campaigns, especially some that are more technical, where they can, encrypt their payloads or make them look more legitimate. So that makes it a challenge even for those services to find this malware. And to your point, it's impossible to have as an organization, even as a person, just trying to operate, I think, on the internet in this day and age, you have to access Google Drive and Dropbox and Azure. That's just kind of, I don't want to say the cost of doing business, but just the reality of, this increasingly interconnected world.
Well, let's go through what you all were tracking here together. Can you walk us through the campaigns?
Sure. So we've been tracking a couple of campaigns as well as some other organizations. And when we started pivoting around looking for some similar ones, that's where we stumbled upon what we found. A few weeks after another organization reported on them abusing Dropbox, we identified them doing another campaign. This time, this was targeting a NATO country in Europe. And they were using what appears to be a legitimate invitation that they found for an upcoming meeting with an ambassador in Portugal. Interestingly, we saw them send the same attachment twice, which isn't something we see necessarily. The one only real key that this was honestly not legitimate, obviously, was there was a typo in the email for how it would have been addressed for the actual common parlance. But we saw them still abusing and continuing to abuse Dropbox. And their also being attentive to the malware that they're using that's being served. For the case that we observed in particular, the malware that was served to the victim was last modified only about 2 hours before the actual spear phishing message was sent to the target.
Hmm.
So you can see they're paying close attention and doing some level of customization and also making it difficult to detect these. They're not letting their malware just sit out there for people to find or researchers to potentially poke at. They're being very judicious about when it's actually available for a victim to pull down.
Yeah. I mean, talk about, spear phishing indeed. That's highly targeted, it seems.
Yes, and they are known for being very highly targeted. This is kind of their bread and butter, in particular with diplomatic missions. They have been targeting diplomatic missions since at least 2008. So they've had a lot of time to work on their social engineering.
So let's dig into some of the details here. I mean, let's say I'm someone who they're targeting here, and I'm going about my day, minding my own business, and I get this email that seems to come from the Portuguese embassy, and that's something that I think I'm interested in. What happens next?
So if you opened the email with the weaponized attachment, it would install itself on your system, and then it would start to begin looking for the second stage to pull down, which would be calling out to a Dropbox or a similar kind of cloud hosting provider. So there's that level still of removal where the first stage malware is on a system, but now to get the second stage, there has to be a successful interaction with the C2 server before that will then be pulled down. And we see that quite a bit. We're increasingly seeing that across all attackers, but we definitely see that a lot with more espionage motivated attackers where they try to be careful that it's not a researcher like me that they've accidentally compromised or has somehow gotten in the way so I can get more of their custom malware. They check to make sure that it's the victim that they wanted before serving it. Because the harder it is for researchers to get a hold of custom malware, the more difficult it is for us to signature it. And with some of the really advanced groups we see, especially for their second, third stage malware, they're very, very careful about when they serve that out because they want it to last as long as possible.
And now, a word from our sponsor, Keeper Security. Keeper is the top-rated cybersecurity platform for protecting organizations of all sizes from the most common password-related data breaches and cyber attacks. Did you know that 81% of data breaches are caused by weak password security? Keeper is more than a password manager. It's a scalable and customizable security platform that includes industry-leading features such as automated user provisioning, role-based enforcement policies, SSO SAML integration, advanced reporting compliance, breach-watch dark web monitoring, and more. Members of the CyberWire community will receive a free 3-year personal password manager when they take a business demo. Visit keepersecurity.com/cyberwire to learn more. And we thank Keeper for sponsoring our show.
Today's podcast is brought to you in part by NordLayer. NordLayer safeguards your company's network, but it's much more than just a VPN for business. It secures and protects remote workforces, as well as business data, and it can even help you ensure security compliance. Most modern businesses are adopting network solutions like SASE, Zero Trust, and hybrid work security. NordLayer has all that and more. Don't leave your business vulnerable. Try NordLayer today. Get your first month free by going to nordlayer.com/cyberwire. That's nordlayer.com/cyberwire to get 1 month free.
So if I get that second stage sent to me, and do I need to interact with it to get it to run, or is it all happening automatically behind the scenes?
Oh, it's all automatic at that point. Once you open the email, they are off to the races without any help from you.
And what are they after here?
In this case, it looks like a typical long-term compromise for sensitive diplomatic missions and potentially negotiations that are going on, which is a target that we have seen them go after consistently over the years. The interesting things that we have seen is it looks like we saw a bit of a shift towards some Western diplomatic missions between May and June. But when you look at the geopolitics between May and June, that also would make sense from a prioritization and a targeting perspective, where you'd expect to see an actor that is serving the Russian government targeting areas and diplomatic missions where there's a lot of, tension or potential activity going on during those timeframes.
One of the campaigns that you all outline here seems to be going after folks in a foreign embassy in Brazil. It caught my eye that I guess on the the main page of this email, they misspelled Brazil. That would strike me as a red flag to Brazilian citizens, but perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself.
Nope, little things like that. We just continue, and that points to that there are humans involved in this, right? And sometimes they make mistakes where there'll be a little typo. It was the same with the other one where it was one little thing. And that was a key to us that, that doesn't look quite right. And same if it's coming from your embassy and they're misspelling your country, or it's coming from any embassy and they're misspelling their own country. Yeah, I think that'd be worth checking into maybe before you clicked on everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a fascinating contrast, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we can see how deliberate and careful and targeted they are, and yet something like this slips by.
Yep, and sometimes that's because there's different people responsible for it. The people that are carrying out the technical access components are not necessarily the people who are crafting and sending the spear phishing messages. So there can be a gap in ability there.
One of the things you highlight is a tool called Envy Scout. What exactly is going on with that?
Envy Scout is essentially a dropper for additional malicious files that they might want to install on a network, and it can be customized to install or beacon out to install whatever the attackers want. So it's a very lightweight, very small piece of malware. And it's a great way for the attackers to be able to customize and potentially change out what the actual malware is that they deliver to the network. In this case, we also saw them using the perennial favorite of all hackers, it seems these days, which was Cobalt Strike. And that's definitely something that's making it more difficult for defenders, because we see everyone from, ransomware actors all the way through these sophisticated nation state attackers like Cloaked Ursa, all using that same tool, Cobalt Strike. And that from a defense perspective, until we can get additional malware, another second stage, another third stage where it's more customized to a group, this could be anyone. And it makes it very difficult for defenders to prioritize how they're going to respond to it, because getting Cobalt Strike beacons from your network is becoming increasingly common.
Right.
And you don't have any way of telling, unless you have the additional malware, who is this? Is this Cloaked Ursa, where I need to pay attention immediately? Because if they have Cobalt Strike on one of my machines, they could, within the next 10, 20 minutes, they could own an entire domain server. Or is this a coin miner, where, yes, I want to get to it, but I don't need to call people in over the weekend to do it?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Are there any other technical aspects of this report that you think are worth pointing out or drawing attention to that people should know about?
In particular, Cobalt Strike, that for those that are still struggling with defenses against that, it's critical. It's not something that organizations can kind of look at as something to be down the road. There's too many different attackers all exploiting it for it to not be prioritized at this point, because much as the current environment is very similar to, it's not really an if, it's a when you're going to be compromised. When it comes to seeing Cobalt Strike in your environment, it's not really an if, it's a when you're going to see Cobalt Strike. And hopefully it will be for something that isn't incredibly serious. It won't be a group like Cloaked Ursa, but it could be. And that's going to be a very bad day for any of those organizations.
Usually we talk about protections and mitigations, and we'll do that. But it strikes me that when you're dealing with an organization that is this targeted, that is this specific in their targets, does that even apply? What are the odds that someone at a any random organization is going to find themselves in a group like this as crosshairs.
It depends on the organization. If you fit their kind of targeting and profile, then if you haven't already, hopefully that's accurate.
Yeah.
And if you have, then you've already recognized how very sophisticated some of these groups are such as this, and how very quickly they can move around an environment, and you recognize that it's something you need to be protected against. This group is another reason we really talk a lot about the zero trust concept, as that term comes around again, becoming increasingly critical, because you have groups like this who are incredibly technical, who will take advantage of supply chain and trusted relationships, who will take advantage of legitimate cloud hosting services and social media platforms, and who can get away with it successfully because they are very technically skilled. And you need to recognize that from the defense standpoint and be able to react accordingly. And in some cases, it can be as simple as, do you need access to all of these different applications in your corporate environment? With a lot of the cloud services, you can argue no. But, for some of the social media ones where it's like we saw them abusing Trello, or, historically LinkedIn and Facebook have also been abused. Is that something that people need access to at work? Some of those are things that you can kind of shut down, at least potentially from a work network, but then you also have to recognize there's others you can't, like Dropbox. And how are you going to make an effective business protection decision knowing that you have to allow that access into your environment?
Yeah, it also seems to me that, cloud services like Dropbox or Google Drive they're practically the poster children for shadow IT, because, if you get in the way of someone trying to do their job and they feel as though they need to access Dropbox, they're going to find a way.
Exactly. And that then becomes its own problem of people doing it, that you aren't aware of it. And that just opens up all sorts of issues for a company, for potential sensitivity. That's one of many reasons I've been recommending lately people try to do attack surface management scans, or have a plan to get an organization, a company that can do that kind of service for you, to give you an idea of what your actual organizational footprint looks like online. What ports are potentially open, what isn't passed, what things like that do we discover that are tied to your organization that aren't officially tied to your organization, or, that dial-up modem that someone used 15 years ago that no one ever turned off, that's tied to a printer that's still, connected into the production network. Little things like that. And those are the same things that attackers are looking for when they're looking at an organization. And people need to increasingly move to viewing themselves from that same global viewpoint of, what do I look like as a potential victim? What do I look like as a target from someone who can only view what they can find on the internet about me? And then use that to make informed decisions. Every time I've been involved, organizations have invariably found a non-trivial number of devices that they didn't realize were still operational or were still connected to their network, because, device and network management is a challenge. And the older and larger an organization you are, the more of a challenge that is.
Any other recommendations here in terms of protecting yourself or mitigating this sort of thing?
The only other thing I would add, and it's not necessarily related to this, it's related to some of the things that we've seen recently in the press, is smishing and two-factor authentication are becoming increasingly critical as we see attackers working to defeat them, and not sophisticated threat attackers like teenagers looking to defeat them. So organizations need to have an effective policy. They need to have multi-factor authentication in place, period. And then they might need to look at some other policies for how they handle if someone is spammed with requests to constantly try to authenticate. Does that trigger a behavioral rule where, maybe it temporarily locks out an account, maybe it flags it, things like that, to address what we're already seeing with attackers trying to get around some of the mitigations that we've put in place.
Our thanks to Jen Miller-Osborn from Palo Alto Networks for joining us. The research is titled Russian APT-29 Hackers Use Online Storage Services, Dropbox and Google Drive. We'll have a link in the show notes. Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the Cyberwire possible. You know, bacon does a body good, but so does sponsoring our program. If you like bacon, send us a note at thecyberwire.com/sponsor, because everything's better with bacon. The Cyberwire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing Cyberwire team is Rachel Gelfin, Liz Irvin, Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, Brandon Karpf, Eliana White, Paru Prakash, Justin Sabi, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next week.